currently in a remote site called Mambolo in Sierra Leone. So I'll be taking this presentation from here. It's a small mini grid, and perhaps we could have applications here as well. So we'll be speaking today on repurposing lithium-ion batteries for second life applications in solar photovoltaic microgrids. Oh, this is just another introduction of myself. I'll just go right into it as well. I'm currently, RAP actually shows the 4 Rs of circular economy, which is reuse, remanufacturing, and refurbishing and recycling. We know for a fact that today, but traditionally, batteries are not designed for the circular economy. So what we have most of the time is batteries designed for a linear, from a linear kind of approach, where you have the take, make, use and dispose kind of approach. So if you notice from this graph, you have energy and material inputs, which represents the mining operations of the materials involved in battery production. And then you have the production phase, which is where these materials are put together to form these products, which is the batteries in this case. And then you have distribution. Batteries are distributed to several places where they will be used, where they will be applied. And then when they reach their end of life, they are just disposed, which is the disposal stage. And then you have the waste and emission leakage. Now, what's the problem with this linear approach to the entire battery value chain is that it is not sustainable. It is not a sustainable means. We are taking materials from the earth. We're taking limited materials from the earth, and the more we take, the more we put the environment under pressure, the more materials we require, and the more materials we can get from the earth. So this linear approach is not sustainable. At the end of the day, we don't also dispose these batteries at their end of life responsibly at the moment. So it becomes really important to look into reuse, remanufacturing, and refurbishing, and as well recycling the materials at the point of disposal, because we have limited resources at the inputs, and then in order to allow us reduce the amount of waste that we derive from this linear approach, yeah, we have to adopt the circular economy perspective for batteries. So traditionally, batteries are not designed with the circular economy in mind. They just take this linear approach. So what we'll be exploring today is how we can prospectively design batteries, or look at batteries from this perspective of getting to disposal and reusing, cascading them several times to prevent to allow responsible disposal, basically. So yeah, I'll talk about the proliferation of lithium-ion batteries globally. So if you look at this chart, you see the projection of global lithium-ion batteries between 2018 and 2030. Now, at 2018, we only had we had demand for EVs. If you look at the first chart in gigawatt hours, we look at the demand for electric vehicles, energy storage systems, and consumer electronics, and we see that the demand is still under 500 gigawatt hours, right? And then we compare that to 2030, where the projection spikes by 14 times. So this is actually a scary figure, because it means that we will be demanding, we will be requiring a lot more lithium-ion batteries in the global market by 2030. And that is projected to increase by 40 times. And with the new discovery of with the advent of electric vehicles, with the high demand of electric vehicles and increased efficiency of these batteries, it may just go beyond 14 times. I would say that this is a very conservative projection, and we may have even more higher demand for lithium-ion batteries. So at the moment, this is a future projection, but at the moment, we are already struggling with a proliferation of lithium-ion batteries from consumer electronics, thanks to the information technology boom. If you read between the slides, you see that electronic waste from batteries used in consumer electronics is already a global issue, especially in several African and Asian countries that do not have a formal recycling facility. So the results in the result is the dumping of these batteries in landfills where informal recyclers collect, dismantle, and crudely process them to reclaim their valuable yet toxic metals by hand. Cobalt, which is a major part of these lithium-ion batteries, is toxic. It is dangerous to public health. And if we have informal recyclers exposing themselves to such a toxic material, you can imagine what the effects on their personal health will be and what the effects will be to the environment as well, in terms of whether or not they are containing their processes. For instance, if because they are informal, of course, we don't expect them to contain their processes. It means that you could have a huge amount of cobalt in the soil, in the landfills where leaching into the soil, in the landfills where these operations, these informal operations go on. And then you could also have cases where it rains and then you have runoff of these toxic materials into water bodies as well. So this is just a public health disaster waiting to happen if we keep dumping lithium-ion batteries at their end of life in landfills. And if we keep giving them to informal recyclers, basically, which is probably the only form of recycling we have in most African and Asian countries at the moment for lithium-ion batteries. I believe the recycling of lithium-ion batteries is still very expensive. It's not proven technology, it's still emerging, but it's still, the cost consequences are still very high. So this is another field of research that many of may want to go into in the future. Yeah, so the rebound effect. The adoption of lithium-ion batteries is somewhat analogous to the adoption of coal for use in energy generation during the Industrial Revolution. Improved industrial yield and productivity, but ignored the short-term and long-term environmental effects. Most of us have probably read about the Industrial Revolution and how coal, which is a fossil fuel, really changed the industries that we have in the West mostly, and increased yield. But then we ignored the short and long-term environmental effects, which still exist today, which we're still facing right now. So now there's this huge global clamor about decarbonizing transportation, sector coupling, decarbonizing our grids by the adoption of energy storage technologies, especially batteries, which is the most popular energy storage technology. There's this clamor globally that we forget to think about the long-term effects of adoption. So if you adopt lithium-ion batteries, there's increased demand. What happens at the end of life of these batteries? What do you do with them? Because now you have a huge amount of batteries at their end of life in 10, 20 years. What do you do with them now? What are they useful for at this point? Recycling is still very expensive, like I said. So what do you do with them? This is a question that we are going to try to answer today. So this is how our batteries will end up in the hands of informal recyclers. This picture shows some informal recyclers in a landfill in Ghana trying to extract the valuable materials from e-waste, including batteries. You can see on the pictures lithium-ion batteries also in the soil. probably leaching away their contents into the soil, which is very toxic as well. So these are the informal methods that is currently being used to extract valuable materials. And obviously this is a public health disaster, as you can see. Okay, so we've addressed the first issue, which is the proliferation of lithium-ion batteries. The second issue is one of energy, basically. So we have solar-powered microgrids. We know that the solar resource is seasonal and variable. It's intermittent in nature, generates power during the day. And we know that this was the barrier in its adoption at the early stages, but now energy storage technologies, especially batteries, have come to save the day and allow storage for use at night or non-peak or off what do you call them, peak periods, basically. So we know that lead acid and lithium-ion battery technologies have been deployed in microgrids globally in rural electrification as well as commercial and industrial projects. So we know that, okay, solar energy is good, is renewable, but then you still need energy storage to store power for use at night. And batteries provide that solution very well. Now the question is, we now have two problems. We have the problem of intermittency on one hand, which is for the solar resource. On the other hand, we have the problem of the environmental damage coming from the improper or irresponsible disposal of lithium-ion batteries when they reach their end of life. So we have one question on our minds. Can lithium-ion batteries that have been used in certain consumer electronics and EVs, which is their first life application, be repurposed for a second life application to prevent them from contributing to environmental damage in landfills and to use them as a cost-effective energy storage system in photovoltaic microgrids or mini grids? Photovoltaic microgrids is the focus here because this is actually my field of expertise. But of course, batteries can be applied to um, grid systems, wind power systems, and what have you. So now, how can we apply batteries that have been used in a first life application? How can we cascade their use to a second life? So this graph or this flow chart describes how we can do that. Um, so according to the US Advanced Battery Consortium, they recommend, actually there's a recommendation that especially for EVs, that when lithium-ion batteries reach 80%, they have reached the end of life. Now, this may not be, of course, a lot of experts argue on this. There are lots of arguments on the correctness of this, but it is still relatively correct. When a battery in electric vehicles reaches 80% of its state of charge or 80% state of health, now not state of charge, which means that you have residual capacity of 80%, then you should decommission that battery from that EV and dispose it, basically. So now what we're saying is decommission that battery from that EV and cascade it for a second life. So now the first step here in this flow chart is that the battery reaches 80% of the beginning of life capacity, beginning of life for its second life application or power, right? Now the battery is removed from that first life application. Complete battery pack is shipped to recycling or reuse company. This is actually the repurposing facility where the batteries undergo incoming testing and evaluation. The batteries are disassembled and components are separated. All of the components, the battery management system, the cells, the conductors, the bus bars, everything could be disassembled and all of the components are separated. And the recyclable components are consolidated. The recyclable components could be bus bars, copper bars, nickel sheets, whatever, plastic trays, um, whatever it is that is recyclable after they've been disassembled. The models with mechanically mounted cells are broken down and components separated. So modules that have cells that are mounted, that are bolted or compressed together are broken down. So you unscrew those bolts and you separate all of those modules. Lithium-ion modules and cells undergo characterization testing. Characterization testing involves um, checking for internal resistance, checking the state of health of the battery, checking the new residual capacity of the battery, just making sure that the battery has a certain amount of energy in it that could, a residual amount of energy in it that could be reused. So the next stage is modules and cells that do not meet a minimum criteria are sent for recycling. So the cells, the lithium ion cells that do not meet a preset minimum criteria, as the repurposing facility, you know your standards. You know that, oh, if I don't want to use if I want to use, for instance, cells that are from 60% state of health, then these are the cells I'm going for. Anything below 60% state of health, I need to send them to be recycled, basically. So the next step is that modules and or cells that do not meet minimum criteria are separated into different groups based on their capacity. So the modules that do meet minimum criteria, rather, you separate them into different groups. You separate them based on their capacity. For instance, modules that are 60% residual capacity, 70% residual capacity, 80%, you separate them into different groups. You sort them appropriately, is what I mean. Now, cells can be reassembled into modules for second life use. Now, this is the part where you reassemble all of these cells that you have initially sorted. You reassemble them into modules and apply them to a second life. Now, you know what the energy requirements of this second life is. So you build these cells to actually meet the energy requirements. You build these modules to meet the energy requirements of your second life application. Now, your second life application definitely could be photovoltaic microgrids, could be UPS systems, could be anything, but you know the energy requirements and you build the cells to meet that energy requirement based on their residual capacity. Modules are now ready for installation in a second life application. Now, after building the modules, you know that the modules meet the energy. Of course, there's going to be consistent testing using all sorts of methods, checking the thermal stress on those batteries, on load, checking the discharge cycle, the charge cycle, everything, just to make sure that the modules are ready for your application, which is photovoltaic microgrids or whatever type of microgrid that you want to use those batteries for. So we have two companies right now that are big, that are actually leading the way in this second life application market. And by the way, the market for the global market for second life application is big. The potential is huge because the resources are already available. The resources are huge and they will keep increasing. Going forward, you're going to have a lot of batteries from electric vehicles and consumer electronics and energy storage systems reaching their end of life. And this is actually a resource, a major input in the value chain for second life applications. So we have these two companies doing exploring those potential. Aceleron is a British company, and they are already using the same methods, using the methods of characterization and testing of these second life applications to create a new product. A new product like this. This looks like a jerry can. Create a new product out of second life applications that can be used in these micro hive, which is where I until recently worked, is also doing the same thing. And this is also a picture of a set of batteries with a battery management system in a rack that was installed at the early stages of our research. So, thank you very much for having me, and I would have to ask all of us here to remember to reuse, reduce, and recycle, to think sustainably and live sustainably as well. Thank you very much.
So thank you very much.